Rotorua. Welcome to the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting for this morning. I'd like to welcome our public, the media, and just remind people that this meeting is being live streamed. Please keep your mobile phones on silent or off, and just to let you know, we'll aim to take a morning break about 10:30 with lunch at 12:30. I'd like to ask lunch by 12:30, but we'll see how we go. It's entirely up to you guys. I'd like to ask Miss Bray if she could please open us up with the karakia this morning. Mene, ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Miss Bray. I'd like to call for apologies this morning. Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apology for lateness from Her Worship the Mayor. She's opening a conference of valuers and quantity surveyors this morning.
Thank you. We'll take that. And I also have an apology from Miss Rothwell, who is unwell today and doing the right thing by staying home. So can I have a mover and a seconder for those two apologies? Moved Councillor Donaldson, seconded Mrs Yates. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you. Is there any declarations of interest for this morning? There appear to be none. Any urgent items that are not on the agenda? There also appear to be none. We'll move to confirmation of minutes on page 6 for the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting. Minutes of the 3rd of June 2021 be confirmed as a true and correct record. Moved by Councillor Okawa-Tate, seconded by Ms Bray. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried, thank you. We now move to a notice of motion on page 11. I'd like to just explain that this notice of motion has been received under Standing Order 27.1. and it has been moved by Councillor Bentley, seconded by Councillor Kumar. So I'd now like to invite Councillor Peter Bentley just to speak to his motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My reason for calling for such a review is that I think the ratepayers of Rotorua are really confused about the direction in which this council is heading. The latest reorganisation of the management staff is the fourth in my memory from my time on council. It appears that every time we have a little bit of a hiccup, we have another staff reorganisation. My call is that such a review would be conducted by an experienced, independent and impartial person of integrity. I would suggest that a chap like Peter Winter would be ideal. He is well versed, well qualified in this field, having done similar reviews of at least 3 other New Zealand councils. There's a lot of chatter in the public arena about this council's direction. If we're on the right track, then an independent review will confirm this and quieten the chatter. The review could also come up with some suggestions for our future direction. Whatever the outcome, the review will improve the confidence of our ratepayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Kumar, as seconder, was there any comments you wanted to add? Or has Councillor Bentley summed it up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Councillor Bentley's summed it up, and I'm supporting him with what I'm hearing in the community. There's a lot of things the council are doing good, but there's some things that they're concerned about, and this would just probably give an opportunity. It doesn't undermine what the council is doing, but it just gives them some certainty, because there are certain valued groups out there that feel that they're not represented going forward in the future, and when they see some abrupt changes in these tough times, they think that it's a good idea to give them a little pulse check just to see if the heart's beating properly.
Well, thank you very much. I will I'm not too willing to open it up for full discussion, but I will allow a view opposing the motion. But I would also just like to remind everyone, in terms of the direction of council, that just on Monday we approved our long-term plan, which sets the direction for the next 10 years, and also just for the public's information, that LTP has been independently reviewed by an auditor who has actually sat in front of us and said that it was a really good LTP, which I think is very, very commendable, and not often that auditor will say that, and so that is an independent review in some way. But I do take on board your comments, and thank you for raising this motion. I'll open it up if anyone has an opposing view. Councillor Yates.
I just wanted to actually just confirm a couple of things, and that was we're here at governance level, and the matters that have been raised are to do with management, which is clearly with our CE, and I just wondered whether or not that would be a point of order that would then be redirected back to the Mayor to deal with our CE.
Actually, you've raised a really good point, and I wonder if, because correctly that is the operational side, so I wonder if the correct committee to bring this forward to would be the Chief Executive's Performance Committee, because rightly so, what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's a review of the recent restructure changes that have happened at operational level, not necessarily a review of the Rotorua District Council from a governance side. Was I correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm quite happy then as Chair to move that on to the Chief Executive's Performance Committee. I think you have raised a good point. We do at any stage have the opportunity to discuss this as elected members with the Mayor, and we also have an opportunity to raise concerns as they come up. And the reason for that ruling as Chair, reading through the email that you provided us with and listening to your feedback, both yourself and the seconder's feedback this morning, there's not, in my opinion, too much evidence that there is a need for a full review when we have already had an independent auditor look at our long-term plan. And if I can put that into perspective of the public's interests, that audit review costs somewhere between $250,000, and I don't think that this organisation has shown any evidence of a review that is required further. So that will be my final ruling of that. I'll let the mover have a right of reply, but then that's all the discussion that needs to have this morning.
Point of order, please.
Yes.
Point of order. You've alluded to the judgment made by the auditor. His role is restricted to approving the integrity of the long-term plan, not the priorities, nor the financial strategy itself that's evident in the long-term plan. It simply checks the coherence.
Not actually a point of order, but I'll take your feedback on board and actually correct you that that is exactly what the auditor does. So I will allow Councillor Bentley a right of reply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given the fact that several of us elected members are excluded from the committee that you're saying this should go to, I think it's just a dead duck now. But it is common in most businesses that you have a business advisor come along. And I had it myself in one of the businesses that I was involved in for many years. And while I disliked the person that was doing it, he proved over a couple of years he was invaluable in changing the way that we did things, and it became a very, very profitable business. Now, the recent changes to our 7 assistant chief executives.
Point of order, Your Worship.
I do wish the member could get the titles right. Just
Okay,
get it right for the record.
Not a point of order. Please carry on, Councillor Bentley.
Deputy chief executives. This council only employs one man, and that's the CE. Several of us are excluded from passing judgment or have a chance to indicate their misgivings about the direction of this council. We have approximately a staff turnover of 30% in this council.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Point of order, Your Worship.
This is not a right of reply. I think the council is not clear about the outcome review that we undertake with the Chief Executive. It's not for us to get into the operational issues, as you pointed out quite correctly at the beginning of the meeting. I don't think the council is very clear as to whether you're asking in this rather clumsy motion for a review of the Chief Executive, which is all we can ask for, or a review of the organisation, which we can't ask for. So you're unclear with just the
what
notice
I'm asking
of motion.
for, Madam Mayor, is a review of the Chief Executive.
Which we undertake on an annual basis, and all councillors
I
are
am excluded
Through the
included.
chair, please. I'll call for order. Through the chair, please.
So let me outline that we set the directives we set the expectations on the outcome review with the Chief Executive, and in confidential we feed back to all councillors and give the opportunity for feedback. So you're quite wrong that you're excluded. We have a subcommittee delegated which are part of the powers that we set at the beginning of this term.
Your Worship, I think we've got your point that you want to note,
Good.
but I want to keep the discussion specifically to the motion itself, which was calling for an independent review. Councillor Bentley, was that all of your comments?
Yes, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. And look, I want to respect your right to bring up this motion. I think that it hasn't been appropriate to carry forward at this committee currently, but if there are some serious concerns and some evidence that you have that there is a requirement outside of the already detailed audit that we do through the long-term plan process, which covers all of our direction, then I think at that time, please return with that so we can discuss a matter more specifically instead of general. So we will move on with that. Thank you very much. We will move to our staff reports on...
Can I move that the motion be put?
Pardon?
Can I move that the motion be put?
No, as chair, I've ruled, and that ruling will be final, that the motion is not appropriate to put at this committee. I believe the motion through the email that you've shared with us and the comments from the mover and the seconder this morning don't show that there is clear evidence or background for a requirement of a review. When
Madam Chair,
just this week we have approved the long-term plan, which has been independently audited. So no, that is my ruling and that will be final, but I have invited you to please bring a motion forward again if you believe there is clear evidence to the contrary of what I have said.
So I followed exactly what Una Hopkins told me to do. So what repercussions does she have?
Well, don't need a point of order. It's not up to us to decide what repercussions should come from a staff member, but I will just check with her on whether I've got my ruling correct. Okay. Sorry, that is correct. I do have the right as chair to rule that. Yeah. And I'm seeing from around the table that some do support that as well. We won't have any more discussion on this issue. No, sorry, with the notice of motion, there doesn't need to be questions. The mover and the seconder have had the right to respond. We've had a view to the contrary, and I've made a ruling as the chair based on what I've heard that it's not appropriate to raise at this committee. So we will move on. We're on page 12 now for staff reports. No, sorry, I won't. That discussion's completed, so it's okay. We'll just move on unless you have a point of clarification on my ruling. Oh, no, that's okay. We don't need to bring that up. But if you want to confirm the $250,000 cost of an audit, then you're welcome to raise that with our staff after. Yeah. Okay. So you're most welcome. We'll move to the financial performance for the 11 months ended 31st of May. I ask for a mover and a seconder that the report financial performance be received. Moved Mr. Waru, seconded by Councillor Rotorua. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Welcome, Thomas Collet. I'd like to invite you to overview your report, and I believe you have a presentation for us this morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, councillors and board members. The financial update for the 11 months to the end of May 2021. So the themes that we've pretty much talked about probably for the last 6 months has continued. So overall, our operating expenditure has exceeded budget on the back of a number of initiatives. The majority of this has been offset by additional revenues that have helped support that. But the challenges that we've faced in around parking revenues in particular, inner city security costs and expenditure supporting housing has continued. There's a little bit of a new theme coming on board with regards to a little bit of an extra depreciation expense, which is obviously a non-cash. And as a result, we are now lagging a little bit behind the budget. Just a reminder though that the budget that we are reporting against is the stretch budget that we set ourselves. Microphone keeps going in and out. And so the actual budget itself, we are actually performing better than that. So when we report our annual report, we will actually be tracking ahead of the actual budget. So just a reminder, we are reporting against a stretch budget. From a net activity performance perspective, just highlights again that you'll see that the challenges themselves are clustered into 3 areas. Community and regulatory, which is a reflection of the parking revenue challenges. Sewage, which is a reflection of some trade waste volumes being down and a depreciation impact. And in the community leadership space, which has the economic recovery costs and also supports the majority of the initiatives in the housing space. From a capital delivery perspective, this was probably up until what we're about to embark on next year, one of the biggest capital works programs that we've had for a while. You'll recall during the long-term plan discussions and deliberations that there was a portion of this year's capital works program that has been moved and deferred into the year 1 of the LTP, so we were never going to achieve the $117 to $119 million capital spend. At the end of May, it was tracking at about 60 million. We anticipate this to rise up to about 70 million, and within that, there's an incredibly high percentage of completion in our renewal work. So obviously the prioritisation of renewals into looking after our infrastructure has been completed, and there's a lot of other initiatives as well. But it is projected to be There we go, that's better. Projected to be about 70 million at the end of the year. So as a result, because it now is the 1st of July, and obviously we have ended the financial year, what I can say is that in a year that we plan to borrow $57 million and end the year with about $276 million worth of debt, we actually only borrowed 13 million. And so that's actually pretty much exactly where we expected it to be with regards to the number of projects that were deferred in our capital works program transitioning into the next fiscal year. And so we ended the year $13 million increase, so total borrowings of 242 million and net cash on hand of 6 million. So it's quite a pleasing result for the end of the year. So where we are to date, so an operational result that is lagging behind the stretch budget, capital program that is underspent due to deferment of some key projects that is reflected in year 1 of the LTP, and debt that's on track, and where we expect the end of the year an operating result that will lag behind our stretch budget but actually will be better than expected than the actual budget in our annual plan. CapEx that will be underspent with that deferred program, and obviously debt being well less than planned and is actually reflected on a good operating result and actually where our capital works program is. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, Councillor McPherson.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. I wanted to preface my comments by saying, from what I've read, the overall impression is that we're getting very high quality financial management. So thank you very much for your services, Thomas. Much appreciated. Despite my concern over priorities, I recognise the fact this is pretty competent stuff. Just a couple of queries. The operating expenditure, can that be reined in or offset in some ways to adjust the end of financial year result? Or are we pretty much looking at the end of year and without much capacity to adjust the expenditure numbers?
So, Councillor, bearing in mind we've now completed the financial year, as I said, and I've been saying for the last several months, the trends with regards to the fees and charges, the investment in inner city security and the housing initiatives were to continue and have continued during this month. So my expectation is that against the stretch budget, the operating result has fallen further back by the 30th of June, which was obviously yesterday, but will still be ahead and better than the actual budget that's set in the annual plan.
There's no other, through you, Chair, there's no other recoveries possible or further revenue that may come in that could assist?
No, everything is.
Thanks, okay. Page 13, you notice there is a note there about lower recoveries. Are they to do with staff costs?
Yes, so there is a number of our staff are budgeted and carried with regards to supporting capital works projects, and so where that comment comes about is generally the level of their time that is being capitalised against capital projects. Bearing in mind, and this is where it gets technical, is that they may be spending 100% of their time against those capital projects and the delivery of those projects, but from an accounting technical rules perspective, we may not be able to capitalise all their time, and so therefore a portion of it is reflected as operating expenditure.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question around the borrowing. So you've said that we've borrowed less, which is to do with the timing of the capital works, but there seems to be a lot of economic talk about interest rates rising. So what can we do, or is there a strategy to maximise our borrowings whilst the borrowing costs are lower?
Look, interest rates will rise, and this was something that came up previously. So just a reminder to Council that our borrowings for Council are set in a way with a Treasury policy which PricewaterhouseCoopers assists us with, and so that the repricing of our program, our program of borrowing or our portfolio of borrowing takes a significant amount of time, and so we have in the long-term plan anticipated an interest increase over the period of the 10 years, and that actually is reflected, and the pace at which it increases is a reflection of how we've currently structured our borrowings. So I guess the confidence that I can give you is that if there was a sharp increase in interest rates in the short term, you will not see a sharp increase in our borrowing rates because of the way that our borrowings have been structured. With regards to the question of can we take advantage, we possibly could. However, we are limited by, obviously, we are borrowing to deliver capital works programs, and in a market where resources are stretched and saturated and not available, are we able to accelerate our capital work program and therefore borrow more to support that? May not be able to achieve that. If it was, that would be something that the Council would have to give us direction on with regards to whether they wish to use borrowings to help accelerate the program of work.
Thanks for the answer.
Third question. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Just, Thomas, the question about 10 million set aside for economic recovery projects, have you had any detailed business cases to apply for that against those projects?
Not myself, Your Worship. So you recall that's something Jean-Paul is dealing with. He previously, I think several months ago, tabled a paper to Council outlining how a portion of that has been assigned, and there was a portion left over. I'm just not sure of what else has come in since then, but might be something that JP could give an update on the operational report.
Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Thomas. I just had a question about the addressing the issues around the Holidays Act. So is that all accounted for in the budget that the year that's just been closed off, or will that have implications for operational costs going forward? And how are we getting on with that?
So how are we getting on? The project itself was done in 2 stages. The first stage was all current staff. That portion of the project has now been completed, and we're now in the phase of dealing with the ex-staff, and I understand that's progressing quite well as well, and I anticipate that this project will wind down in the next month or 2. I guess it's pleasing that we didn't have a similar result to the DHBs, which was announced in the paper. Many of you may have seen that their liability is close to $1 billion, which is a hefty amount. With regards to the impact on our financial result, so in the last annual report, we were anticipating something, so we made provision for about $500,000 to $600,000. And so this year's annual report and financial result will be impacted with the difference between what we'd previously been provided for or not. So yes, the result will be impacted come time at annual report, yes.
Thank you. Were there any other questions on the financial performance? There appear to be none. We will move to operational performance. I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the operational report for May 2021. Moved Councillor Maxwell, seconded Mr Waru. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. And I now invite Thomas to overview the business support group.
Quite brief, however, there were a number of comments made earlier that I'm happy to confirm. So the cost of our audit for our long-term plan is approximately $250,000, and as a comparison, the cost of the audit for our annual report is about $150,000 to $160,000. So these are exercises that provide confidence to our community that requires substantial resource and obviously investment into that. I am just going to confirm with my team around the staff turnover. There was a number that was thrown around before at 30%. My recollection is that it's not close to 30%, that it is actually a little bit lower, but once I have that number, I'm happy to confirm it with the elected members.
Thank you. Were there any other questions for business support? This is page 16 of your agenda. Yes, Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question on the procurement policy. Are we still using the criteria that we set for the COVID-19 recovery around the use or the, just trying to think of the right word, the rationale for using local labour and businesses with local offices as a priority against other organisations which may be able to provide at a lower cost?
So for you, Chair, yes, there is still the local supplier criteria that under certain scenarios where the price is within 5%, that we do have the option to use locals. The policy itself has been a bit refreshed. My chief executive challenged me yesterday, and some colleagues challenged me yesterday on the policy around, does it go far enough to support the drivers of creating employment in our community and localism? And so we're just going to have a bit of a further discussion on that before it is tabled to yourselves. Just a reminder as well is that while the procurement policy itself has that 5% criteria, we also have the ability and are doing it with regards to when we do procurement plans of when we go out, setting the criteria that actually only local businesses can apply for these contracts and therefore only be awarded. And so there are times where when Rotorua does have the expertise that we require, where we actually do that. And so the team are actually proactive with regards to ensuring that work is delivered locally. Just bearing in mind that can't always take place, and so therefore there are occurrences where out-of-town contractors are doing work for us.
Councillor Yates, followed by Her Worship.
Through you, Madam Chair. And it's more a comment than a question, but I would like to acknowledge Thomas and the team for their report and also the work that you're doing. But the comment is around the recruitment and retention, and one thing that I'm very clear about is that with all the negative chatter out there, it is making it very difficult for our council to recruit quality people. So we have to be mindful as councillors, and I urge each and every one of us to be mindful of that, because it does impact negatively on not only us functioning effectively as a council, but also recruiting well as well. Kia ora.
Kia ora, point taken. Your Worship the Mayor.
Yes, and I've got a bouquet for you, Thomas, too, that we've had several public events here in this building lately, and great comments back about how beautiful the work that's been undertaken on restoration of this building alone is, and how much it's appreciated by the wider community. So congratulations. And they've particularly noticed the wood first features, and they've also noticed the ruareo. And so well done, because you don't often get thanked.
Thank you, Your Worship. Brian and his team has done a fantastic job, and the building is now 99% complete with regards to its refurbishment. There's just a couple of little things like the facilities in the atrium that need to be refreshed, and so thank you for this feedback. I'm sure the team will appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas. We'll now move to our operations group. We are on page 16 to page 26 of our agenda, and I'd like to invite Jocelyn up to speak to the report.
Morena tātou e hui mai nei tēnei ata. I'm just going to take my report as read and invite any comments or questions.
Councillor Maxwell, followed by Councillor Wang.
Tēnā koe e hene. Yes, my question and comments are on 5.1 on page 14. That's the Sir Howard Morrison Centre. Wonderful to see the pictures and seeing the progress that's being made there. But I also noted it in Thomas's report earlier about, I think it's called an extra spend in the facade and crack repairs and replastering. Is that going to hold our opening schedule up in any way?
Thank you for that question. We are providing a wide community update tomorrow, and we're now looking at an opening date mid-2022, so next year. So we're still planning to open next year. It will just be around Matariki.
Thank you. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morena, Jocelyn, and thank you for the report. Really enjoyed reading about all the projects and the great developments that are going on in our district. My question was around the Aquatic Centre, and are you able to update us on the issues that outdoor 50-metre pool is facing and what's been done to repair?
You might like to invite Rob Pickethley down to answer that if you'd like. So this is our sports and rec manager.
I understand that the temperature of the pool has been lower than usual.
Yeah, that one's not working.
Kia ora tātou. Through you, Madam Chair, we have had some heat issues with the 50-metre pool. There's a very old control unit from the 80s that affects a whole lot of switching, electronic switching, which runs the heating and a few bits and pieces, pumps and things like that. That had a problem, and there was a manual reset needed of all that, so they need to balance everything. From my understanding, they've got it up and running now. We've got a new unit on its way from America, which will hold until we redo the whole system. But it has taken a little bit of time to balance the heating and pumping requirements manually rather than using a CPU type device.
Thank you, and I'm sure our local swimming clubs will really appreciate it.
Your Worship, followed by Councillor Donaldson and Councillor Kumar.
Yes, just a question to you, Jocelyn, about these lofty projects that we are undertaking. A lot of the chatter in the community that I do hear is that these are going further and further behind. Could you assure the community that we're on time, and we've given reports about why some are delayed? I think that will put to rest some of that chatter about the projects.
So there are a series of projects, obviously, that we have underway at the moment, and they're all at different stages and of completion. So, for example, the lakefront, we have stages 1 and 1A due for completion, and by the end of this, or handing back to us by the end of this month. The karakia will be provided for that by the end of next week. And the overall project is running on time and will be completed next year. With Sir Howard Morrison, that has been underway since October last year and will be completed in 2022 as predicted. We've updated around our museum and the reset that we're doing there with respect to ensuring that we have our detailed design well completed and well considered with respect to engineering, and we've sort of been clear that we believe the opening of that will be in 2025. And Whakarewarewa is now almost complete, with only the cultural foundation work to be completed there, which is running on time also. So we do have many projects that are at different stages. We have come through and provided reports to our governors, you as our governors, around where each of those projects are at, and we will continue to keep everyone updated as we work through the projects, which are large and extensive and in some ways very complicated, but we have good work programs in place.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. My question possibly been answered, but it follows along from Her Worship's question, and it was something that I looked into when I lodged an official information request in relation to an earlier item on the agenda, which is now off the table. So in 2017, under the current Chief Executive, a project management office was established in this organisation, which we haven't had before. Could you comment on the role of the PMO in these major projects? Are we getting the full forensic examination of these buildings before we spend millions? Because millions have been spent on these buildings prior, and now we're having to dismantle them and start again. So I wonder if you can comment along those lines.
Our PMO was established to ensure that as we ran our projects, we had professional project management of them, and we've definitely had a huge amount of input from the PMO in terms of establishing the frameworks and the governance groups that oversee the PMO. Amy, who was leading the PMO, is actually leading the projects. We've pulled her aside into a role reporting directly to me to ensure that our projects are on track. Those are not the only things we have in place to ensure that our projects are properly delivered. We use expert engineers and technical advisors to ensure that our delivery of the projects and the construction and the procurement and all of the parts of the project are properly managed. So we have a lot of technical advice to ensure that we're not just, it's not just people like myself just running the project, but we provide governance over the project. So we do make sure that the projects are well governed and well advised in terms of the amount of technical and expert advice that we take on board to ensure our projects are on track.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Jocelyn. Jocelyn, a couple of months ago, in a report you told us that we were struggling because I see we've got lots of building consents and all on them. We were struggling actually at that time for planners, and myself made 3 appointments 3 different times for 3 different people. We were struggling for duty planners or planners, but you were aggressively recruiting at that stage. Have we fulfilled those positions to sort of combat and take the challenge of all the heavy load of concerns coming up?
The good news is that we have actually managed to recruit a senior planner into the team who starts shortly. The other thing that we've taken on board is that we're using consultants to help to manage some of the workload to ensure that we don't end up with large backloads. I've had a bit of a conversation with our team, with our leader, our manager down there this morning, and he's let me know that we've got our new guys starting. We've got we don't have any sort of major issues in there at the moment, and they're working through their backlog and continuing to work with the public to ensure that they get the information that they need as they're putting their consents through.
Just supplementary to that, Jocelyn, I don't believe it's negative chatter. I think it's just that the industry of building is just growing so widely, even in the private sector, that people are applying for jobs or getting jobs in places where the money is more. And as we have to manage ratepayer money, I guess sometimes we are restricted to, as a council, as to what we can pay as opposed to what the private sector pays.
We do try to ensure, though, that we're competitive with across the board. So, if anyone's looking at coming here, I would like to assure them that we would, we are looking at paying market rates to ensure that we recruit the right people and get people in place who can help with the work that's needed to be done here.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I've got 4 questions. The first one concerns on page 19, the cooperation protocol between RLC and police. It's being revised. What are the substantive aspects of the updating? My concern here is that until about a month ago, arrest by exception was the understood approach that was being used. Then we had the intervention the last week or so when a batch of Hells Angels were arrested. Is this shifting the focus towards a no-tolerance policy of violations of law and order? Because it would represent a significant shift away from arrest by exception.
I find it very difficult for an operational leader to answer what is in effect a police issue. So that is not the right question to put to a Deputy CE.
Well, perhaps I can revert to the first part of the question. What are the substantive aspects of the updating? Thank you.
So we haven't completed that work yet. We're just getting it. We're getting it done, and I'm happy to have further discussions once we've got that piece of work completed.
Okay, thank you. We'll just leave it there then. On page 20, there's quite an extensive report on the parking, the updating and so on. It's quite clear that we're once again failing to achieve the parking revenue targets. They've been described as stretch targets, but is it approaching the time we might have to revise the parking policy and the iPark contract?
The iPark contract is in place for the next, I think it's in place for the next 7 or 8 years. We have regular reviews of the iPark with the iPark team. Those are stretch amounts that we set within our budget, and it is difficult to predict who's going to come into town and park, but we won't, at this point, we're not looking at revising it, no.
Thank you. It's interesting. Page 34, with reference to the Ngāti Ringawiwi contract, I recall we've not seen that contract as elected members, nor the contract, except some of us have seen the Trilogy contract. Are we going to see a copy of either or both contracts as elected members?
Councillor McPherson, you've just delved into the Manahautu Māori section, so perhaps we can defer that question to Gina when she's before us. If you want to hold that and go on to your fourth question. Okay, and
then on page, I'll leave that one for the moment. On page 45, we've got some specification of the...
sorry, Councillor McPherson, we're only on page 16 to page 26 in operations now. But as we move through, I'll let you know what page and you can ask a question at that section, if that's okay.
Yes, I'm trying to draw on this this person's expertise. But thank you very much. I'll leave it at that moment.
Thank you. We have Councillor Kaifong, Councillor Okawate, and then Her Worship, and we'll move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question around building consents, because we approved a performance measure for new houses, targets for new houses, and you report in page 21 the number of consents that were issued. Would it be more appropriate to have the number of code compliance certificates issued rather than the number of consents issued, so that we know exactly what the new build target is rather than, because sometimes people apply for a consent but they may not get on and hurry up and actually build and finish a property?
I can ask the team to add that in.
So I think that would be a useful measure against the performance target. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Good point, Councillor Kaifong, thank you. We move to Councillor Okawate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just, I just wanted to follow up on a question that Councillor Donaldson asked, and it was around the project management. And I understand now that Amy has moved into actually managing the projects. Is that correct? I think I heard you say that.
So last year, Amy moved across into my team just to provide additional assistance and oversight of those of the big projects, in particular the lakefront, Sir Howard Morrison, and the museum.
So she's still got the position of the PMO, I think it was called. Was that the?
So when Amy came across on secondment, we've put Justine now looks after that area.
Thank you. The reason I'm asking is because I remember when that when Amy put that position in place, or when the position was put in place, I thought there was a very, very good rationale for that, because you know, she had the helicopter view, obviously, and could map very clearly how they were tracking and the resources required and all of that, and I thought it was great. Now I was a bit alarmed to hear that she's now managing the projects as opposed to having that helicopter view, which I actually really liked.
Exactly. I've just asked our Chief Financial Officer to come to the table to also provide some insight on that.
So just to support my colleague and to give the Council the assurance that the Project Management Office is still operating as it was. Amy has been seconded out to support, obviously, Jocelyn with those 3 significant projects and helping being that interface. But the Project Management Office currently has Justine Wilmoff, who is our Manager of Finance and Business Performance, seconded into that role and is providing leadership in that space. And so the Project Management Office still works with the organisation around setting up the criteria, the systems, the processes, the monitoring of our projects, and where appropriate has a small pool of project managers to assist the organisation in the delivery of those projects. So yes, while it was a secondment and Amy's doing a fantastic job supporting those 3 projects, the PMO itself is still operating as it was.
Thank you, Thomas, because I think that was an excellent move, that establishment, and I just wanted to make sure it was still there. Thank you.
Her Worship, and then we'll have one last question from Councillor Yates.
Yes, just Jocelyn, Thomas is gone. Nice to hear that a councillor that seconded a motion that's now not on the table, supporting that we value and pay our staff properly. That's nice to hear. At the same time, others saying that we're overreaching in the budget, but good on you for that, because our staff matter. My question to you is, are we farming out? And I'm glad that the work's being done. So I'm getting feedback that some planning work was undertaken outside of town because the job was important to get done. Is much of that activity happening, Jocelyn?
Where appropriate, our staff will undertake the work within the group. However, to ensure that we are moving forward and that we keep that we're not developing enormous backlogs, we do have work that is going out to other contractors who are just supporting the whatever part of it that they can. Generally speaking, they're not decision makers in terms of consents. However, they can help us prep the first parts of the work. So. Yes, there is a fair amount of that occurring where appropriate.
And could I just comment that I've just opened the Quantity Surveyors Conference here in Rotorua with 300 participants, and the discussion there was how well our planning division is managing and how excited they are by the volume of work that is growing in our district.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Kia ora, through you, Madam Chair. Hara ko tēnei he pātai, engari he mihi. Especially, this is such a big component that's taken into considerations with the operations group, but I want to especially acknowledge the area of mahitoi, arts and culture, and acknowledge all of the schools that have been participating. So if more of our schools would like to still continue to engage with Rotorua Museum, Te Whare Taonga, also with Te Aka Mauri, these entities are still up and running. So me mihi ka tika kia koutou, and just keep up the good work, Jocelyn. It's great to see the progress happening on Sir Howard Morrison. Yesterday I was down at the lakefront. Nice to also see that from QE2, as well as the museum, which whilst might be in a holding position right now, I look forward to 2025 when that is eventually open. Kia ora.
Kia ora, and sorry, I had one last partai from Councillor Donald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for indulging my pedantry. It is a comment and a correction, and only because names are important. But at the bottom of page 24, the 3 iwi hapu representatives on the Waikawau Hannahs Bay Management Committee, the middle name should be Niriaha Pereka, not Pereka. So if we could just get that, because he is related to the first guy. So thank you.
Ka pai.
Mō taku here, we'll correct that. Thank you.
Kia ora, Jocelyn. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Waru.
Tēnā koe te tiamana. Thanks for indulging me. Tēnā tātou katoa. Jocelyn, tēnā koe tō reporter. Paku pātai noa, we're talking about a lot about the consensus processes and things like that, and good to hear you starting to build that team up a bit. I was wondering, has there been any, amongst your team, any kōrero around how you can sort of improve that whole sort of process, and maybe are there things there that we're focusing on too much and some things we need to focus on a bit more? I'm not too sure. Has there been a process?
Yeah, yes, there has been. So we've had good discussions within the team to try and ensure that, and there's ongoing training occurring to make sure that there is a standardised approach that we begin to take. When we get questions from the public or from people coming through with their consents that seem like we might be being too pedantic, we look closely at that and make a call, and then we go back through and talk to the team about, adjusting the way that they're looking at the mahi that they're doing. So we're always open to being told where there are areas for us to improve, and we do constantly review the mahi that we do to try and make sure that we aren't being pedantic. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. I'd now like to invite Stavros Michael up to speak to the Infrastructure Group report. And we are on page 26 to page 34 of our agenda now.
Kia ora tātou katoa. I will take the report as read, Madam Chair. I just want to make a couple of comments and then happy to take any questions elected members may have. Obviously, our report comes to the end of the current financial year, and you can see from within the report the majority of our activities over the last 11-12 months have been around giving effect to the stated objectives of our infrastructure strategy, which is basically to undertake actions and activities that ensure the reliable, safe and stable condition of networks for the city. I'm very pleased to report that all of our renewal programs have been completed. Our proactive and reactive maintenance processes have been adhered to. You received recently a report of our non-financial KPIs for the major part of the financial year. And in infrastructure, especially our three waters and transportation areas, we all achieve green scorecard, which means we're meeting our KPIs. We continue to work with partner agencies, both at the Crown Infrastructure Programme, where they provided funding to allow us to undertake some of our long-term infrastructure investments to enable our housing objectives, especially of stormwater. We have met with them as recently as last week, and again, they are satisfied with the program we have undertaken. We continue to work with our partner agencies, the Waka Kotahi, in terms of improvements to our state highways, and as you would appreciate, there's a lot of work activity in progress at the moment, both to the east and to the west. But that activity will continue because it's got a primary objective of unlocking land for development and improving our future transportation capacity needs for the district. And also, obviously, you are fully aware of the ongoing work of the government with regards to the Three Waters Reforms Programme that's been taking place, and a lot of us have been heavily involved into that process, and I suspect you're fully aware that over the next few months and the next few years, we will be even more intensely involved with these activities in terms of digesting, recognizing and implementing those legislative reforms when they come to fruition. So that's what I want to say. So thank you very much and happy taking questions.
Thank you, Stavros. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Stavros. Stavros, just maybe a couple of weeks ago, there was a review done on the website audit. When's that report due, please?
Councillor Kumar, I think you are referring to the waste assessment audit. The intention of the audit is to evaluate what level of contamination we receive in our waste receptacles, especially the commingled recyclables. There are two outcomes of that. One is where we have identified that individuals place contamination into the combined recycling products. We address them individually. We go to people and talk to them and tell them this should not be into the recycling bin. The general waste bin, the red bin, as you know, is subject to a report you have received recently, which basically gave rise to the LTP recommendation you had for us to consult for a FOGO or food organic green waste collection next year, because we have identified about 46% of the material goes to the waste bins are organic or green waste. And you have gave us some direction as a result of that assessment to progress this financial year and engage in consultation with a view of you making a decision later on whether you want to implement the green waste collection. So these are all already in place.
Councillor Bentley, followed by McPherson and then Your Worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Stavros. With regard to the chatter that's out there in the community on the speed humps and recently installed, are they compliant with New Zealand standard in that I understand the standard is for 100 mil rise, and these ones, some person has come up and said they're 190 mils. What's your comment on that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. I think it's a pertinent question to be asked because next week, some actions will be taken in that particular area. Can I take a bit of a step back? I think I want to again remind elected members that road-related crashes result to deaths and injuries in Rotorua District Council have a social cost of about $116 million a year. As a result of that, in conjunction with national standards, we undertake what we call risk assessments, and that risk assessment leads to a multi-criteria evaluation of priorities where to intervene. Interventions includes a whole range of areas, and one of them is the installation of speed humps or judder bars, speed control devices. There are standards for those installations, and I'm sure you're referring to an area around Kawaha Point and Ford Road, where recently has been installed. There is no question that the requirement for those interventions was absolutely right. It's also correct that, as is standard practices, we complete a project and before we make payments to the contractor, we do an assessment about the compliance of those installations with the specifications provided to the contractor. Of those speed humps, we found there that some of them are exceeding the 100 millimeter height by a range between 10 and 25 millimeters. And the contractor next week is required to go and correct the mistake. And that will be activated as from next week. And I think, leaving aside that particular case, I was discussing with some people recently, should we be doing that? And the answer is emphatically yes. If you pay a service deliverer to install something at a specific standard specification, payments should not be made unless the specification is delivered. I understand that could be annoying, it could be to some degree detrimental in the views of some people, but it's imperative that we insist that contractors deliver projects to the standards they have committed to deliver, and that would be rectified next week.
Thank you. Very good question. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Thanks for this report. Once again, comprehensive. Just one area. Do you want to provide an update on the recent sewage spill, and in particular, whether or not that spill reached the lake? Thank you.
I presume you mean the blockage of a manhole on Linton Park, because I think in general terms people talk about sewage spills and there are wastewater malfunctions at all times. No, to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe that that blockage resulted in a spillage through the lake. But however, you should be aware that whenever we have the potential of untreated wastewater to escape the containment environment of pipes and manholes or even flows onto the grounds, we have an obligation to issue a warning to the community to say potentially that be contamination. We follow up with detailed monitoring of surrounding water sources. And again, you should be aware that there are bathing standard levels where E. coli or coliforms are detected into the water environment that it's above 500 coliforms per 100 milliliters of water. We have to issue a warning to the community to avoid bathing, getting into that water. To the best of my knowledge, the contamination of that nearby water sources did not reach that bathing standards, but the warning signs were important to be put into place until we have established that by fact and by detailed monitoring the water supplies.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Your Worship.
Stavros, and thank you also for your work in the Three Waters domain. We are well informed as a council of progress there, and we'll be discussing this on Monday as a council. If I could just go from sort of humps to aspirations, which is the big stuff that we want to get doing now after signing off the long-term plan. I am hearing about penalties that we might incur by having to break a Trilogy contract. Do you want to put that right on the record? Well, we're just trying to correct misinformation.
Thank you. Thank you. I do hear that too, and I read it. The reality is that every contract we've got with an external party, if we breach the intent of that contract or the terms of that contract, there are going to be penalties. Now, the question arises as to why would we break that? To the best of my knowledge and to my history over 35 years, in managing an infrastructure, progressing in services, I have never been exposed to an accusation by a contractor of being in breach of a contract I have entered with. And as a matter of fact, I would be extremely disappointed, if we, as an organisation, have taken any action that would breach our contractual commitments to that. I suspect people referred to a possibility that if the Three Waters reforms takes place and the Trilogy or any other contracts, long-term contracts we've got at the moment, are transferred from the jurisdiction of this council to these national new entities, are we going to be in breach? And the answer is absolutely not, because the contract made appropriate provisions for novation of that contract. And the contract has got legal provision for transferring responsibility of that contract and any other contract under the stewardship of another entity, provided that the other entity is no less substantial than the council is. So I'm very comfortable that we don't face that risk.
Have we got the criteria yet for the Infrastructure Investment Fund? I'm being asked this because of our aspirations of growth, and so much of it is caught up with stormwater and others. Have we heard?
Expression of interest criteria have been put on Tenderlink, and myself and JP will be working together to respond to that. But obviously, it's a significant opportunity for us to secure more Crown infrastructure programme funding for our future capacity development.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Bray.
Kia ora, Stavros. Page 32 of your report, under the stormwater heading, bullet point 3, the bamboo removal from Tarewa Road drain has been completed. I just want to say thank you so much for doing that. And is there any further work to be done on Tarewa Road, or is it looking quite good if there's another heavy rain? Thank you.
Thank you, Aroha. Look, proactive interventions to maintain capacity in our stormwater channels is part and parcel of our ongoing work. I can't tell you off my head at the moment as to how much additional work is required on there, but certainly we know they have limited capacity in our stormwater system. We understand that because a lot of the systems have been constructed and maintained over a period of time where the standards and climate change are not so much in effect as they are today, but certainly we'll continue to assess limitations and work towards it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Waru.
Tēnā koe. Sorry, I'm just getting mixed up here. Kia ora, Stavros. You know I always have a couple of questions for you. So, but pai ngā pātai. Hoi anō, just it's more about the waste. So, wanted to ask a question for those who are overfilling their bins. There's people who are overfilling their bins, and I noticed you've talked about that. But what can actually be done about that officially?
Thank you, Rawiri. Look, I think at the technical level, we can't refuse to collect a bin doesn't fill above its capacity. And then the idea behind that, if you don't collect it, the person gets a lesson and they don't do it again. At the same time, I think there is a grey zone where pragmatism have to come into effect and says, well, if we advise that person to improve and they improve, that's fine. If a person continues to be in breach of their rights and their responsibilities, then we take the next action, there too. So we will always going to err on the side of assuming that a person who breached that responsibility did it by mistake. We give them appropriate advice and work with them to correct it.
Kawa, I was just making sure that there is actually a process in place. So kia ora. My second part is about the food waste kaupapa. I know a couple of months ago we had this presentation, quite an innovative thing that was going to be happening soon. Well, soon I mean rather later. But any updates on that?
Yes, as I said earlier to Councillor Kuma, the Council gave us a direction, the LTP, for year one of the LTP to undertake a consultation process We have constructed a business case. We've already made an application to the Ministry of the Environment under the Minimisation Fund to secure capital investment for that work. This is 1st of July today, so obviously over the next 2-3 months we'll be doing that community consultation and they will report back to you with the outcomes.
Great. Tēnā koutou. Kia ora. Thanks, Stavros.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, followed by Councillor Wang and Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two things, Stavros. Really interesting to read at the bottom of your report about the National OSET testing facility. The final bullet point talks about a pause while there are agreed test procedures for New Zealand. Will that in any way be part of the Three Waters reform, that consideration? Is my first question. Is it? I see we're a party to those discussions, but I'm just wondering whether that's going to fold into the whole Three Waters reform exercise. So that's my first question.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think just, perhaps in the interest of people who might not be aware what OSET means, it is the situation where a property is situated near sensitive environments, whether it is coastal waters or drinking waters or natural resources, and they are not reticulated into a central wastewater system. There are national policy statements that dictate, what kind of standalone aerated wastewater treatment systems you can install in those properties. And the facility we had here, it was meant to test new systems proposed by the industry, and it was run concurrently by ourselves, the Regional Council and Water New Zealand, and the Ministry of the Environment. In recent times, the Ministry of the Environment recommended that in the testing procedures or the performance guidelines for these OSET systems should be guided by the new Australian standards, which is quite significantly higher than the hitherto standards we've been applying into New Zealand. And there's still some debate about as to how do you enact a test that proves compliance with that Australian standards. Second part of your question, so the pause has been made until the Ministry of the Environment decides what standards New Zealand should be following. Second part of your question, would that be affected by the Three Waters reform? And the answer is yes. Since December 2019, our government has established the Office of the Regulator for water qualities around the country, and they're a bit slow to move on, but gradually they will be the lead agency for establishing standards and performance expectations with regards to water quality. And then they will take it over and they will dictate what kind of standards these tests need to comply with. So it's another process where by pausing it at the moment, it gives us some time to understand the regulators' approach to those water quality evaluations or what we call aerated OSET systems.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my second question, just jumping up to your minor roading improvements program, acknowledging that the Kawaha Point speed calming has been on this report since November 2020. I see at the bottom of there is now detailed design for safety options for the bend on Devon Street near the stadium. So just so we're quite clear, will that detailed design possibly or possibly not include speed humps on Devon Street?
Until I get the risk assessment and the design proposal, I can't tell you that. It may. If it does, then we'll have to make sure it complies with standards and specifications.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just throwing it out there. I didn't want to see another letter to the editor.
Thank you for clarifying. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stavros, for your report. My question, actually, a quick little comment following on from Mr. Waru's questions earlier on about the waste, and I think one thing that we really need to be ensuring that we do is educating the community around reducing, reusing and recycling our waste. But my question around to Stavros was, Are you able to give us, I guess, give the community reassurance that Council's $2.6 million investment into the our LED lighting upgrade, street light upgrade, is not only more efficient, but it saves Council on maintenance costs, it's more, it has a longer lifespan, and it also reduces light pollution, so that the previous sodium lights might have, you know, had light going into residential properties, but now that the light is more directed onto the street itself, that might be why they feel that it's become darker.
Thank you, Councillor Wong. Just in the interest of clarity, Council did not invest $2.6 million into that. 85% of that invested by the Waka Kotahi. Council invested only 15% of that. The business case for converting to LED lights is quite compelling, because obviously that there are significant energy and maintenance savings into that. From memory, I think our normal operating costs for our street lights was in the region of about $800,000 a year. The projected savings from the LED conversion would be $360,000 a year, so close to about 45% of that work. And that results from energy, lower maintenance, and longevity of the LED lights. I'm aware of some concerns by people who says this is not as bright as they used to be, the other lights. In terms of LUX assessment, we find that it's more focused on a particular area. There is less light pollution or light spillage. Where we get some intervention or some concerns about a particular area where people say, well, I would like it to be a bit brighter. There are standards for lighting residential streets. We will do an assessment of those standards, and if we need to add another light into a particular area, we'll do it. But nevertheless, I also am aware, reading through the comments and the correspondence I get, is that it's sort of things that people got different views. It's a subjective view where people think they would like more light, some people say less light. In terms of complying with standards, the answer is yes, we will achieve the savings, yes, we will achieve the longevity, there is less light pollution, and actually statistics indicate that the LED lights are more effective in terms of safety in some areas, because they're more concentrated in a particular area.
Thank you. And just following on from that, and I apologise, I meant to say total investment in the $2.6 million. How is the rollout going along?
It's finished.
Thank you.
Great. Councillor Maxwell, followed by Mr Hurd.
Kia ora, Stavros. Kei te pēhi a koe. Kei te pai. Page 33, refuse collection. The last bullet point there, which I'll read just part of it. At the time of reporting, more than 90% of the floating wetland material has been removed. I know this was before your time, Stavros, but we were all, the council of the time, all excited, creative, innovative. We were saying things like, eat your heart out, Hollywood and Wellington, the signs. What went wrong with our wonderful creative...
I enjoy the excitement, Councillor. It's great. Two things. First of all, any material that's been constructed has got a limit. It's got a shelf time, a shelf lifetime span. That floating wetland had more than 10 years in existence. Like any material, deteriorated. Decision had to be made as to whether it was sustainable to invest money in upgrading it or reinforcing it, or to adopt alternatives. And if you recall, I can't remember exactly when we talked about it in this forum, it says, well, it's actually because of the level of deterioration after 10 years, it caused more risk to the lake water quality than actually benefit. So it was removed. However, it doesn't mean that wetlands are not a very valuable instrument in improving water quality. And as late as actually thing on Thursday, I've met between us and the Regional Council and some experts from Australia who, because we're applying for the comprehensive stormwater resource consent, for our stormwater system, together with the Regional Council, we're also working on the improvements to the Puarenga stream water quality. And we now started planning the installation of significant volumes of wetlands around the eastern side of the lake. So whatever we've lost from the floating wetland will be overcompensated by more terrestrial, wetlands created around the lake's, edges. And we're working with Mana Whenua to that respect too. The Regional Council are on board, the Ministry of the Environment are on board. And obviously, I think, that wetlands would be a significant instrument in us trying to improve the water quality for our stormwater management in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stavros, I just wanted to say on behalf of the residents of Puaiti and Hoko Road, thank you for the tar seal as reported on page 28. Unless you've actually lived on a gravel road, you don't understand how much your quality of life improves by having your road sealed. And as a former roading engineer myself in a previous life, I was building these roads for a number of years, and I can reassure Council that the work is of a very high standard. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hurd. Well, those are some lovely comments to finish on. We are overdue for a break, so I'd like to adjourn for 10 minutes to refresh yourselves, and then we will return with our Manahotu Māori section. We will resume our meeting. We are on page 34 of the agenda, and I have Gina Rangi here to speak to us about Manahotu Māori Group. Welcome, Gina.
Tēnā tātou ia kurangatira I tēnei wā o te makariri o te matariki. It is, I will take my report as read, but I did want to note that it is matariki and we do have quite an exciting program of events. So it won't appear in this report, which deals with the May period, but of course, if you are interested in the events at the library, also the farmers market and so forth, there is information about events on our webpage. Also, I wanted to highlight the lecture series after work next week, Matariki Māori Kura, which is an incredible lineup of Māori women giving public lectures here in Council Chambers. Probably the thing I would like to highlight for the month of May is the Ngāti Rangi Wiwihi Protocol hui. So elected members will recall that there are a number of protocols that we have with a range of different mana whenua groups, and most of them provide for a meeting every 6 months or so. On the 20th of May, we had a regular meeting with Ngāti Rangi Wiwihi. The council's elected members to that who worship Mayor Chadwick and councillors Donaldson, Maxwell and Raukawa Tate. The meeting discussed some incredibly important strategic issues relating to Three Waters infrastructure and the proposed reforms, and the implications for some of the commitments that council has with iwi members. So we're working through what that looks like, particularly noting the announcements made yesterday. In that regard, just as a reminder, the water take that council operates for Ngongotaha area and Te Koutu in an emergency comes from a spring on land owned by Māori land trustees, Te Puna Peke Haua trustees, who come from Ngāti Rangi Wiwihi. They allow access from the council, by the council to operate and manage a water take on their land from that spring, which is what we use to supply that part of the urban district. So with that, are there any questions?
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair, through you. This takes me back to a question I perhaps misplaced earlier, and it might come across as a bit vague, but at the moment we're facing, as you pointed out, a massive change to do with the Three Waters, the ownership, the funding and so forth and so on, at a time when we've got an agreement in place with Ngāti Rangi Wiwihi and another one with Trilogy to do with various forms of service provision. But we do not, as elected members, have access to those contracts, and thus it's very hard to figure out how it is we're going to respond sensibly to the Three Waters proposals. So it's a vague kind of a question, but is there any possibility that we can have access to that agreement with Ngāti Rangi Wiwihi? Kia ora.
If I can just clarify, the Trilogy agreement, my understanding, and this may be something that's better answered by Stavros, but my understanding is that that has been released. So that deals with the Trilogy agreement. There was a request for it some months ago, which was provided. In terms of the Ngāti Rangi Wiwihi agreement, again, we can make arrangements for that to be inspected. It is, however, an agreement. There are a number of agreements. There's leases, easements, an operational agreement and so forth. So those aspects of those will be confidential to the council and the contracting party. I would also note that those agreements were negotiated and approved by a previous council, so that's before my time, and presumably at that time the council members were fully briefed before it was entered into.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer. I'd like to take up that opportunity. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, good morning, Gina. Gina, my questions are rather trivial, and I don't know whether it was require an answer. It's more operational. But with the works that are happening in Ngongotaha, the road works, the entranceways to Rotorua, and on the east side as well, I'm just wondering whether we are working with Waka Kotahi to make sure that those signs are in Terrio, rather now than later? And
Kia ora. In general, we have been working with Waka Kotahi about Māori language signs and standards, because as I've highlighted at previous meetings, the regulations that they have not kept up to speed with the expectations of the community these days. And you'll see in a number of districts the introduction of Māori language signage is becoming quite normalised, and Waka Kotahi are actively developing their regulations to respond to that. In respect of the particular signs at those entranceways, I know that we have previously made a request. I'm not sure where that is at the moment, but I can find out.
yeah, just supplementary to that is that, like, I know we're not travelling much, but every time I go to the airport, I just only see the word airport. So, not being disrespectful, but it would be nice, like while we're conversing about changing, it would be nice. When someone says kura, I know they mean school. But what do they mean when we go to the airport? So I think we need to, we've talked about it since 4 years, but there are some changes that are not happening.
Thank you, Councillor Kumar. I'll certainly take that on board. Councillor Rokawate, followed by Her Worship.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just that I want to, and it's around the Rangawewahi MOU, but it's not actually about that. It's also about the Tūhau Rangi 1, the Rangi Te Aorere as well. And Gina, those meetings are open to all councillors and indeed the public as well, aren't they?
I would have to check.
Well, certainly to councillors, certainly to all councillors, yes.
That's right.
And thank you. And Madam Chair, I would encourage councillors, if they have the time, to go along to those meetings, because this isn't just about getting to see the contract with Rangiwewahi and Council. It's actually that you get a very clear understanding of the relationship in the history and the downside and the suffering from, in this instance, Rangiwewahi, at the expense of their economic development. So that's what I would say, councillors who just say, well, I want to have a look at this, go and familiarise yourself with everything, because it could certainly become an issue with the Three Waters, with the reform. So I'm just saying, so I just wanted to make that sure that all councillors can actually go along to that, to those meetings.
Through the Chair, I would say that, as with all good business practice, the contract provides the framework and the minimum of requirements, but the strength of good operating relationships is beyond the wording, and it's in the trust that you develop through having robust conversations regularly, great communication. So I think that Council should be really heartened by the progress that has been made in those relationships, which frankly began in very fractious times. The Rangiwewahi issue in particular, Council applied for resource consent in some 10 years ago, and we initially applied for a 35-year resource consent, which the Environment Court declined and allowed only 10 years, with the provision that Council was required to find an alternative water source. That's the context which is the reason why these agreements have been reached. It's that without those proactive approaches to good relationships with our community, we are unable to get our major infrastructure projects going.
Thank you. We did have a supplementary question on that from Councillor McPherson, and then I'll go to Your Worship.
Thank you. Just an idea. Could the protocol meetings be inserted onto the calendar?
They are on the calendar.
I believe they
Councillor
are.
McPherson. Yeah.
Thanks. I'll look again. Thank you.
Yeah, they are. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Kia ora, Gina, and congratulations on the work that the unit's undertaking. One of the issues that we're addressing on Monday, I understand, answers some of the concerns expressed by Councillor McPherson about where are we at with the Three Waters, and particularly the role of mana whenua. So we'll probably cover that on Monday, I dare say. do you want to speak to that at all, Gina?
Yes, it is a quickly changing landscape at the moment, particularly with the announcements made yesterday. It is important that the Council reflect on how you engage with particularly your existing agreements and keep faith with the commitments that you have made, but also think about what is best for the community and as the proposed reforms are introduced.
Yes, and the other, in response to Councillor Kumar's question, actually the Minister of Transport came and had a meeting here with Stavros, Michael, myself and our cultural advisor about Ruareo and how we can move it faster with waka kotahi. So actually Rotorua, from our original gingering about welcome signs outside Te Puia, has caused a change to national policy. But any policy direction is quite slow to roll out, but we're right in there. But good on you, because that's the story we're trying to tell. Yeah.
Mr Waru, followed by Ms Bray.
Tēnā koe te te amana. Kia ora, Gina.
Tēnā koe.
Kai te haru I taku ngā kau, nā te ngai rangi wewehi tūturu kai kone e noho ana. So especially my chief over there, Uncle Trip. Engari, and being known also in the actual trust of Te Puna Peke Haua. Kia kaha. Interesting kōrero around the Three Waters thing, but I'm pretty sure we'll get over that up when we get to it. Hoi anō, taku pātai. In terms of, it might be a little bit tricky, I don't know if it's the right word to ask you, with the recent release of He Puapua, has there been any thoughts around how maybe some of those things in that report can be reflected here? Nā te mea koe te mana hautu Māori, e tika ana pēr tēnei pātai ki a koe.
My understanding is that the report is primarily directed at central government rather than at local government. I think the whole question of what governance looks like into the future is certainly being challenged by the Crown at the moment in terms of the introduction of particularly the proposed three order reforms, but also the proposed RMA reforms and so forth. Many of those are just being released, so we are still I guess, triangulating, reviewing what those documents say and what they might mean for this council.
Yeah, I just bring it up because it seems to be quite the thing at the moment in central government, and I know, even though sometimes we don't like it as local government, those kind of things do impact how we roll, I suppose, for want of a better expression, at the local level. Hoi anō, taku kōrero whakamutunga. E harai te pātai ngari he mihi ki te tira o te wharetaonga. It's awesome they've been getting around to having that kōrero and they've got some good support systems in place. Manaki and Lizzie and mea, a Clarky. Kei reira manaki mai ana I te kōrero and I think it's beautiful kōrero and I hope they really, capture it and move because there's ahakoa kei te raru te whare, I really just wanted to put out there very supportive of what they're doing and hopefully we can all get behind it and somehow, get something that we all would be proud of. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe.
Kia ora. Last question by Ms Bray.
Kia ora, Gina.
Tēnā koe.
Are you getting good attendance at your waiata classes for staff?
It's been very poor from the DCE Te Arawa partnerships, and I apologise for that. We generally get very good attendance, both from staff members, but also outside the community. There's a lot of demand. It's really important to this council that when we carry out formal protocols, that we have the capability to do that properly, because we are fortunate to have the support of mana whenua, particularly te pai o Ngāti Whakauē, and it's important that we uphold that mana appropriately. And in that regard, Clark Pirika, who has joined my team full-time now, is absolutely crucial to that. It's also very popular with members of the community as well coming in to participate. We've also had requests from some teams for classes just for them, particularly around, for example, if they tend to meet with community groups, wanting to know how to introduce themselves appropriately, and basically comply with good practice in different settings. So yes, it is very popular.
Thank you. Tēnā koe, Gina, thank you. We now move to page 36 with JP on our strategy group.
Good morning, everyone, and through you, Madam Chair, I've just got two short presentations which I think will just be valuable in framing some of the questions I'm sure will be asked this morning. So I'll treat the rest of the report as read, and just wanted to touch on the inner city, and also Rosemary's here to talk with me about the emergency housing announcements yesterday, but also the work of the task force that's been undergoing for some time. So just briefly on the inner city process. Obviously, this has been discussed at length with you, so for those who have attended the various workshops leading up to the preparation of the long-term plan, and then some of the other workshops, this is all very familiar, but it's just making sure that everyone is in the same sort of position in this space. So if you recall, during lockdown last year, we had... oh, have I lost it? During lockdown last year, we kicked off a number of sector groups, and they worked diligently during that lockdown period to start looking at some key areas of focus. Now, one of those was the red sector group around the inner city. So in the centre of that slide there, you can just see the key actions that they had identified, which was the plan, activate and invest. So those are the key actions. So they continue to be a focus for us. So there is a number of actions that are currently underway. So shortly after that, and actually very much as we return to normal meetings, there was also a piece of work that was undertaken through Stavros's team around the network operating plan for the inner city. So some frameworks there about the importance of the connectivity across the CBD and to the CBD for the various road networks. So one of the actions that we had talked about through that red sector group was to reset an inner city revitalisation strategy. And outside the red sector group, that was also a strong ambition from the Chamber of Commerce as well. So one of those first actions that we really did was to say, look, we've had plans and new plans and plans after plans for the inner city for well over 20 years. So one of the important things for us to do was to undertake a bit of a stock take. And so we commissioned Darryl Church Architects, and they have some urban design capability within their firm to do a stock take of all the different plans that had been undertaken over the last 15 or 20 years, and also reflect both that inner city transport network review and those actions that have been recommended out of that red sector group as well. So in short, what they enabled us to do, and we've presented this to you, is just to highlight some very significant consistency in the objectives we've had for the inner city over the last 15 or 20 years. So those were captured and represented spatially, and you have all seen that diagram to the right-hand side of the screen there, which summarises some of those key objectives laid out spatially. They also highlighted significant inconsistency across that 15 years worth of plans and how the various actions were implemented. So the ones that tended to focus on the public domain were often picked up, but the more challenging ones around how do we facilitate change in building stock or improvement in usage in the private domain were often seen as too hard and left aside. So their general recommendation was you do need to refresh your strategy around this framework, but also be really clear about the kind of action plan that needs to be implemented and make sure that there is a focus on keeping Tūtanakai Street, which was a real key thrust of the Chamber of Commerce, as our high street, and really make use of that existing spine that we have had really since the city was formed. So what have we done since then? Well, we've actually started to share the high-level framework with a number of key entities and partners. And so we have been moving around and talking and delivering what that stock take was to particularly the mana whenua entities, the various whakaui entities, to Tātou Board, but also more widely with groups like the Chamber of Commerce, Takiwā, which is the block champions, and just giving them a feel for that overall framework. At the same time, staff through RED have been talking about some of the activation actions that are underway, and we've also started to say, look, the key steps for us next is we're not going to rush into redoing a plan. So reflecting, I think, on the learnings we've had from the Forest project and certainly the Lakefront project, if we're to get to an understanding and a view of what do we want our city to be like, we need to take the time to make sure that we've engaged with mana whenua about the stories and the views that are critical to the development of those kind of guidelines. So we don't instantly go to we want to use schist like Queenstown, or we're a wood first, we just want to do wood first buildings everywhere or designs. We actually have to get that underpinning sense of what this place is, what's important to the city from a te arawa and a mana whenua perspective first. So that's the piece of work we're currently developing as a process. And through Gina's team, working closely with the Te Tātou Board, but most importantly through the mana whenua entities we've been engaged with so far. So parallel to that, we're also looking at some good examples of some of those incentives policies that have been operated in other locations. Now that's a critical starting point for us then to start engaging with the private owners about how do we get that change in the future to enable and incentivise some of those moves on redevelopments of buildings in the private domain. So very much focusing on that area which has been neglected across probably the last 15 years worth of plans. So at the Chamber we're very keen to act as a conduit for having those conversations out. And equally I think at this stage the high-level framework that we've got in place is acting as a sufficient guide for those developers or investors who are looking for a steer as to what are the opportunities within the city. So that framework is good for us as a placeholder at this stage, but really we need to start working on these other parts of the framework. So we're not rushing to complete this plan, but want to make sure that we get those underpinning pieces in place first, and then there'll be a link to things like the Wood First policy. There's also a crossover with work we're doing as far as a destination management plan as well for the city. So there are a number of different threads will need to come together. So whilst we keep looking back at that red sector action plan, we're also looking to make sure we're careful and considered in how we reset the plans. So that's pretty much just a stock take of where we're up to on the inner city framework. Happy to answer any questions before I go on to the next presentation.
Thank you, JP. Councillor Kumar, followed by Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, JP. JP, a couple of things that I want to talk about and ask. One in particular is while you're going through this review, and hopefully something good, very good comes out of it, you know. One of my concerns is in this review whether if there's going to be a cycleway review, whether it is particularly domain to this. And the other thing is pedestrianising to Tenikai Street, if these two things are on the cards looking into the future.
For the first question, I'd probably refer it across to Stavros. I'll just give him the chance to have a think about that. But my understanding with that other input I talked about, which was the network plan, there was a view of the current cycleway within that, so the green corridor, and how that fitted with the roading hierarchy or that transport requirements for the CBD. So that's my understanding that was being considered in that three options that were being developed around the network roading plan. So I'll stop there and just let Stavros answer that question.
Thank you, JP. As you would recall, Council has directed officers to review the transport functionality of the CBD with a view of deciding whether the green corridor that was installed in 2015, I think, was still relevant to that, initial objective. We reported back to the council, if you recall, last year, and we identified that there are a number of options of how to manage the transport's accessibility and functionality in the CBD. And the council received that report, and we are also directed to incorporate that report into the general CBD review, which JP is working on at the moment. Now, depending, of course, what option you decide, if option is not to do nothing, then the green corridor is still a valuable component linking east and west. If we go to adopt any of the other two options, the green corridor is surplus to requirements, it can be removed. That decision has not been made though yet, pending completion of the CBD review in terms of residential mix and businesses and so on. So once that's work done, my personal view is that because we have completed the cycle connectivity networks around the CBD since 2015, the green corridor is no longer required, subject to specific traffic management and speed regulations implemented in the CBD to reflect the new nature of the CBD functionality.
And just picking up on the second part of that question, I've just flicked back to this map here, which again has remained extremely consistent across the plans we've had. So the east-west connection, so sort of what we define as the park-to-park linkage. So important that we have a roading connection that's very strong along Rotorua Street, but a much more quieter connection along Hope Upper Street. So we may be able to sort of, if we emphasise the roading network, as Stavros has said, along Rotorua as a main connector, you can have a lot more quieter, cycle-friendly, walking-friendly, east to west from each of the parks through Hope Upper Street. The other piece that's indicated here is, and it's one of the strong objectives we've had all the way through the various plans, is the importance of the connectivity between the Central Mall, so on the southern end of that picture, or bottom, through to the lakefront at the top. So with the lakefront development, we're improving the connectivity from the lakefront along that top section of Tūtanakai Street to Eat Street. But one of the important things for us is to improve that pedestrian experience along Tūtanakai. So Tūtanakai Street is still importantly our high street. And so critical to that is to make sure that for people who are shopping and visiting the retail, that it's a well-functioning retail experience. So there has been it's recognised there that improving that pedestrian experience is critical. What that looks like has not in any way been designed or identified. So, you know, there's a myriad of different options. Now that could be as simple as improving the crossings on Erewera, Hinamoa and Pukawatua Street, so just improving that crossing experience so you get that linkage down to Tūtanakai Street, through to a whole range of other interventions that you could do, widening footpaths, etc., etc. So none of that has been planned out. At this stage, it's still at that objective stage of saying we need to improve that retail experience and the high street experience for people. But obviously the vitality and vibrancy of that is also the ability to people to circulate and get to that high street. So that's the framework, and I think that's the critical part, just to keep in mind that there's no plan, no designs. When we get to that, that will be after we've talked about the incentives and after we've established that cultural foundation, which will help drive our designs and our future view of what the CBD needs to look like. So hopefully that reassures you and addresses, I think, some of the random comments that I'm hearing back from various stakeholders.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, can we look at the last slide on process? Thank you very much. Strongly support this. I think this is a very open and wise approach. Can I suggest, and I refer here to an event that Stavros and Gina, they accepted an invitation to come and talk to residents and ratepayers. We had a lot of people came to it and talked through the pros and cons of the solution being suggested to do with the discharge of treated wastewater. And as a result of that event, there was mobilisation of strong support for the direction being proposed. Can I suggest that an extra, under current steps, there's an extra bullet point there that you accept an invitation to come and talk to people, residents and ratepayers, about the ideas that are being considered. That would go down extremely well. Thank you.
I think that it probably comes back here. There is consultation with the appropriate stakeholders and of course the public that we do from time to time too. But I suppose we'll note your point. We now move to Your Worship, then Mr Waru, followed by Councillor Maxwell.
Just two questions really. Love the process, just the time frame. And I'm aware you're all put under a lot more pressure now to deliver. But the community too is sort of, we've talked this stuff for a long time. So when are we actually going to look at that draft when it comes back to council? That's one question, then I've got one more.
Your Worship, I think there's two parts of it, and we're trying to make sure that with using the framework we have, it does not prevent us having successful conversations with developers and those seeking some certainty about what they could or should be doing with their buildings at the moment. So we're very much saying, hey, we've got a framework, been consistent for a long time, that spatially represents it. This is how it's starting to go forward as a process. The second one, and I've been very clear as an undertaking, is it will take as long as it takes for us to work through that process about developing up that underpinning foundation work. And so really not wanting to, at this stage, not able to put a time frame on it. So really want to make sure we get that right. But parallel to that is some of those other actions that we identified from that RED sector group around activations. So still working through RED on those. And certainly engaging with the Chamber as our conduit to start talking about potential incentives and incentives policy.
And my other question was in the LTP, we were thrilled to support apartments and inner city living. And that is one of the questions that I get asked very, very frequently. And then I also don't want to forget the value of Fenton Street, from a lakefront to a forest conduit in that roading network. So when are we going to see the apartments start to come on stream, JP?
It's not something to talk about during the public part of committee meetings, but I certainly was planning on doing a bit more of a detailed update to strategy, policy and finance either next week or certainly next month. There is a significant amount of interest in potentials for redevelopment and development in the CBD, so it is extremely heartening, I think, to see the level of confidence that there exists in our community and in our city. So soon, very soon.
Thank you. Mr Waru.
Tēnā koe te mana, kia ora JP, kia ora kōrua. Thank you for your report. And just going on from Her Worship's comments, you know, I know you're just looking after your health at the moment, so I'll give you 2 months to get it to us. See how kind I am. Hoi anō. Just, I don't know if you could just clarify for me, because I know there's this sort of mahi going on. There's the destination management plan stuff going on. There's another thing as well. I forgot, is it with Damon? And doing. I just want to make sure, can you assure me that all these things are working together? Because there's nothing worse than having all these plans and then it all clashes.
It's a very good question, and councillors will be aware that we have received funding through government to undertake some of the planning that's currently underway. So it's through MB that we received a significant grant to actually undertake the destination management plan. And now we've made sure to, and we've talked to you previously about how that is one of the legs of our draft economic development strategy that we won't finalise until that piece of work is complete. Complementary to that is additional funding we also received through MB and government to undertake or produce an event strategy. So again, that dovetails very effectively into the destination management planning and all of these plans. So you're absolutely right. We are acutely aware of how all of our plans need to mesh together and just also ensure our own internal consistency. But I think the opportunity we have here is each time we engage on a different plan, there is another set of stakeholders which sometimes are the same and sometimes are different. So I think as a network of strategies and plans, it's extremely good for us to ensure that we get that total rounded picture through all of those documents. So yes, we're working hard on it, but actually I think with the different focuses of different plans, we make sure we get a very rounded perspective from our community.
Thank you, JP, and just a mihi to you too. Thank you for acknowledging the mana whenua and using those words too. You know, there's that other word that I hate, and I'm glad that it's actually being reflected in your reports. Kei te mihi ki a koe, kia ora.
Thank you. We have Councillor Maxwell followed by Mr Hurd and Councillor Okawate.
Tēnā kōrua. Yeah, just following on a little bit there, and as I already touched on some of that. Yes, JP, the word, 2 words, cultural foundation. Yes, that is music to my ears, because the grey past, as you touched on it, it neglected it for too long. And it's now being really, really normalised, even here in our own council. Terrific. So thank you, JP. You're really on your bike. Oh, sorry, no, please stay off. I have a question around our committee is fortunate, it's around the Wood First policy review. It might already be in place, but we're fortunate we have Bryce Hurd, who's a lot of involvement with the chamber and the wood area, and also Councillor Kai Fong. Is there consideration for people from this committee to be on it, or are they already there? I don't know.
There's probably I'll go to a short answer. I did watch the last meeting, which I didn't attend, and I understand Mr Hurd asked a question of the executive at that time. So we are reviewing the Wood First policy at the moment. And we are making sure to really throw that discussion as widely as possible. So Mr Hurd certainly will be engaged in that in some detail soon. So we've done some initial work through Scion and also reflected back on how successful it has been implemented within council and also through the consent processes. So really getting that groundwork of how much of an impact did we see. Certainly with the government's reset around wood procurement, it's an opportunity for us to say, look, we led off, but actually it's really great to see the government starting to put a focus on it as well, which should enable some wider system changes, which should again support more use of wood in construction. And it's wonderful we've got some good examples being developed on the Scion campus at this stage, but desperately want to see some of those reflected into our own city as well, since it's such a cornerstone of who we are. An additional piece of it, and it does complement it, is the industry transformation plans that are being established through government. So they've pulled together some critical people, critical thinkers and stakeholders to start doing those industry transformation plans. And so our very own Mr Very is part of that. So someone who is involved in our red sector group around that forestry sector is involved in that. And so we're very lucky to have those representatives locally in the national level industry transformation plans, also in our own wood sector group, and also that ability then to make sure that when we review and complete our policy, it fits within that context really effectively. Forestry Futures was also one of the other legs of our draft economic development strategy, so a really critical piece for us. So we're certainly conscious of how all those pieces fit together and the importance of the knowledge that we hold in our community here to contribute to that.
Thank you. Mr Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel bound to say something. The chamber keeps coming up here. So putting on my chamber hat and just adding a few comments to JP. Thanks, JP. You've outlined it very clearly. The chamber has quite a powerful board that's very representative of the business interests right across all sectors, including Māori, in this city. And our board has resolved that the most important thing that we can do as a chamber is to assist the CBD revitalisation issue. It's the number one issue confronting business, and it covers a whole host of other things. It covers crime and homelessness and rundown appearances and tourism and forestry and wood and Māoritanga, etc. It covers everything. And here we can really distinguish Rotorua's uniqueness, our biculturalism, our wood first, the things that make us what we are. And it's here that we want to play that part to help this become reality. And we know it's a huge undertaking. We know how politically sensitive it is because of the huge diversity of interest in every single title in the CBD. There's at least 3 owners, and sometimes 10 or 15 with different interests. So multiply it up by the number of titles, and every time we say something, we get a host of support and antagonism. So because we're the chamber and we're not politically elected, we are happy to help with some of that dialogue and to take responsibility for some of the faux pas and the feedback and the blowback that we're going to confront and say, well, it was just the chamber floating an idea. But by doing so, we feel we can help to facilitate the debate and get congruence of thought progressively over time that will enable us to do the things that we all know need to be done.
Thank you. Councillor Okawate.
Thank you. I'll leave my my question about the housing until later because that's coming up. But it's just a question on page 37, and it's what is it now? Which one? Oh, 8.1.5 and also 8.1.6. And I'm just wondering if the 1.5, if that also applies to Māori landowners. That's the housing and business capacity assessment, because you're looking to identify how, land for growth, etc. And does that apply? Will you be assessing also the potential for Māori land?
That's correct. So one of the things that we have to do as part of that housing and business assessment is identify all the blocks that are potentially zoned or zoned and serviced or unserviced, and just determine where in that spectrum of feasibility they exist. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. Is there an opportunity for Māori landowners to identify that themselves? I mean, you might have an idea of where some land is, but they might also now have their own aspirations, and they can approach you to say they'd like their lands considered in that area.
I think that's definitely an important step for us now. We're starting to talk about very clearly, and again, this is part of the update I'll do in more detail to strategy, policy and finance, the clarity around how we're planning to address the demand that exists for homes within our community. Now, that obviously means for us we need to start looking at rezonings and redevelopments, and certainly with Stavros and I and Jocelyn looking very carefully at the process that's now in place around the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund. That was that question earlier. So those criteria are released and the various documentation now is on GETS. We have till the end of August to submit some applications. So that's critical for those areas that are zoned or in the pipeline currently. But certainly as we start to look into the medium term, we need to start looking at what other plan changes or zoning changes need to occur. And that's very much has to be led by what's available and what's appropriate to be developed. So if there's interest, this is the time to start raising that.
Thank you. And I just have a follow-up question around the Housing Acceleration Fund, and I just want to know if that also would apply to the Māori aspirations around Papakainga.
Yeah, there's a separate fund, which I think is really critical. So that has been achieved. There's the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, and there is a separate Māori development component as well. So one of the things that we're doing in the regular meetings we have with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and also Kāinga Ora is to start to really clarify which aspects of some of the city's opportunities fall within which scope of application processes. So we're working very hard on making sure that if we go forward with an application, we have a high hopefully a high level of potential success, because we've worked up front on meeting the criteria, making sure they understand the demands, requirements that we have in this place, and making sure that dialogue means we've got the best possible applications and we're pointing them at the right funds.
Thank you. It's a very good question, Councillor Okautaere, and I might just flick over to our lead of Manahotu Māori to see if she's got anything else to add. Gina.
Yes, just in respect of the announcements around funding for Papakainga, the policy hasn't been released yet, and I've been in regular contact with the Crown to get details as that's confirmed.
Thank you. Good to know that we're on top of that. Mr. Waru, you had another comment?
Aye, kora no waku, although I think the Mere Peka might have beat me to the punch on a few of those questions. However, now, there might be some more bullets come my way when I say this. So in the communications, the magazine, tātou, ne? Engari, I look at the insignia on the door and tātou. Has there been any thought to, maybe I don't know if it's the right place, to sort of get that consistency across?
We'll take that as noted, but it has been raised in the past year. That was a previous iteration of the insignia, but we have updated that, just not on that. So.
Okay, boy. Maybe just that door, eh? Kia ora.
Thank you. Well, very brief.
A former deputy mayor of Rotorua, Pakake Leonard, he put the name Tātou spelt that way, and I recall having many discussions with Modi Ora. So it is something between that, but I
was just raising it.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Well spotted, well spotted. So I think we'll conclude that for this presentation, but I do just want to note that it is really helpful to get this detailed information from you, JP, and of course to be able to confirm that Tutanekai Street is not going to be pedestrianised. That is not at all the council plan. So I believe we have another presentation on the housing.
And thank you, Madam Chair. Just by way of introduction to this one, we've been working, as you're aware, for some time with Kāinga Ora, MSD and HUD, and it's a critical next step from the challenges we've had around the place-based assessment. So I think as a work stream, it's really important to acknowledge how valuable this has been. We've seen so many significant issues raised by impacts on the tourism sector of motel use, through to the crime, through to support for families. So we're very much getting to a point now where a significant change in systems and approaches is being undertaken by government. So I'd like to certainly acknowledge the work of Rosemary in this space. And just by way of recognition of that is Rosemary's been seconded into coordinating this piece of work stream across the various government agencies that are working together. So I think that really reflects the knowledge and experience and the leadership Rosemary's brought into this space on a very specific and difficult, challenging project. So really her update today really starts showing how those things have been delivered so effectively, and obviously build on the announcements made yesterday by the Minister. So quite significant changes and quite important changes for the families and the people who are in that emergency housing currently. So on that basis, I'll just pass across to Rosemary.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on the task force work. I know people have been waiting patiently, thinking, what are they doing, and where's the news? And I guess the challenge with working with a number of different departments is looking after other people's information and coordinating and sharing, and it's been a fabulous experience, and there's an amazing team working there. So very pleased to give you an update. You'll be familiar with this diagram from our housing strategy, which we developed last year. Basically, the task force is really focused on those areas circled on the left around the emergency and transitional housing. These are areas which were identified as urgent. They're not things which are traditionally council's area of work, and we weren't leading them, but we were certainly advocating on behalf of our community to those other agencies for a joined-up approach to resolve some of the issues. And you'll be aware some of those issues were really concerned about the safety of people in emergency housing, especially the effect on children, concern about a lack of coordinated support for people in emergency housing, concern about community safety and an increase in crime associated with locations where emergency housing was concentrated, especially where there was no oversight on site of some of the emergency housing and motels. The quality and standards of the motels, and particularly again where there's extended use. It's one thing being in a motel for a week, it's another thing being there with 3 children for months. There was concern about the lack of compliance with the district plan for motels being used for emergency housing, and around the negative perceptions in Rotorua and the effect on the visitor economy. So there are a number of things which had culminated from the move into using motels at a large scale, that had happened quickly. It got people off the street into a safe place, but it wasn't as well planned, and some of the negative things which have happened as a result really needed to be fixed. So that's really what the task force has been looking at. So the members, predominantly HUD, MSD, Kāinga Ora and Council are really the core people, but we've also had involvement from a number of other departments, particularly key information and key intelligence about effects and things happening and other touch points to make sure people are coordinated and understand what's happening and making sure it will work for other key groups like Oranga Tamariki, Corrections and others. So we've been providing a shared working space to bring people together, and it's definitely very effective bringing people into the same building, developing relationships and listening to what each other are doing and working out how you add value to each other. The steps that were identified collectively by the task force were really the things which were fundamentally to address the critical problems at the moment. And those things proposed were to contract motels for exclusive use for emergency housing, to have a hub to strengthen the assessment and appropriate placement of people who had emergency housing needs, and to get the appropriate support around those people. And as well as all of that, of course, continuing to develop that pipeline of social housing, because this is just a stopgap measure. Ideally, you want these supply of people to move people onto proper housing. And the Minister for Housing approved these things, and basically that's where the task force got really cracking. The progress to date, so Housing and Urban Development staff, Lyle and the team here, has been visiting and assessing motels, and they have announced now that there are 12 motels contracted, and they are suitable particularly for whānau with children. I'm saying the moves start today. That's probably very optimistic. I think the work with whānau starts today to get people prepared to assess them, to work out where's the right place and attach them to a wraparound provider who'll help them with their move. So where it says moves start, it's the work on moves starts today. MSD has also visited and assessed motels and identifying them for non-children households. That's the next sort of priority, and they're progressing to implement that. At the end of all of this, effectively, we'll reduce the number of motels used from 45 to less than 30. It'll reduce the concentration of those effects because there's more distributed locations. The guys have tried hard to not have everything concentrated on Fenton Street. It ensures exclusive use for emergency housing, so you're not going to have that mixing with visitors, which can create conflict. And it also means there's clarity for visitors, because there's actually still lots of motels and hotels available. That's numbers there, over 2,000 units available, motels and hotels. That doesn't include Airbnb, campgrounds, backpackers, that's more as well. So there's still plenty of other supply out there. When the guys were looking at assessing motels, this is just a couple of snapshots of some things, but particularly we had advice from Rotorua and our own regulatory team around what were the key things, especially for families. And one of them is having an adequate kitchen facility. So, for instance, the photo on your left there, which just shows a jug and a microwave and a sink. That's not enough for families. So that's the kind of motel which they wouldn't be using for families. And again, the bottom picture is 2 beds very close together. I think the mattress are actually on the ground. And again, that's not considered safe sleeping for families. So that's the kinds of things they've been looking for to make sure that it will be workable for people. Progress around the support services. So the idea is that there will be a hub, and Te Taumata Ngāti Whakaue has been contracted to provide that. they will be, a physical hub will be in place over the next couple of months, but in a virtual way of working, it's already beginning to work now. There's also contracts in place for 4 Rotorua-based social service providers, so that's Wera Aotearoa, LifeWise, Visions of a Helping Hand and Emerge Aotearoa, and they are actually awesome people, and they have been working together to co-design what those services look like. They're developing the capacity and capability, and they'll be on site in the allocation motels and providing the wraparound support services, referring people to other services as need be, but having a much better idea of what people need and making sure there's a pathway for them for what they need. This is just a quick snapshot of them that I took working the other day, but it's really been really impressive. The experience they bring includes things around already existing emergency and transitional housing, working with corrections clients, with families, with mental health, drug addiction issues. So collectively they have a lot of skills and they'll be able to work really well together to help people. The next steps basically is the transition of people to allocated providers and motel placements. That's starting today, but that'll take a couple of months. It's actually quite complex, the boards of where people are coming and going and who's looking after them and at which motel. So I think this transition phase is really the most complex. Once that's settled down, it'll be relatively plain sailing. The focus is on whānau with children first before the others. The pace is really dependent on the capacity providers. You'll have seen a number of them advertising for staff and so on, and that doesn't happen overnight, but they're definitely building up and going as fast as they can. There's an excellent IT system that one of the providers had already developed that will be really excellent for helping with service coordination, and it's a very useful tool that's very oriented to the people and the families and how that works. So I think MSD is really impressed with that a provider had already developed this. The hub, as I said, will begin operating virtually this month, and it's supported by MSD case managers. There'll be a physical hub in the next couple of months. It just takes a little while to get a lease and things in place. And basically the continued development of that pipeline to increase social housing. So HUD and Kāinga Ora colleagues are busy out there looking at multiple opportunities and different ways of addressing that and talking with iwi groups, anybody that they can talk to and identifying land and other opportunities. So that's a very busy space as well. So that's the main points from me, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rosemary, and I'll just invite our Chief Executive to provide some comments as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and committee members. The comment that I wanted to make on this one is that you made it very clear to us, actually some months ago now, that the outcomes that we were seeing with respect to emergency accommodation were completely unacceptable to you. You also made it very clear that the community was providing a lot of feedback to you that things were not going in the right way with respect to the use of motels. What for us was that this was a significant test of the direction of the organisation. Clearly the ability of this organisation to make a difference in this area in fact lay beyond our ability to directly control. In fact, we had very little control over the way that this particular issue was actually being rolled out in our community. But I think it's a significant achievement today that what you are seeing is a completely different direction being put into place. And the reason that this has happened is because of the leadership and influence of actually our staff involved working alongside central government, but significantly also working alongside our own community to actually put in place a completely different direction from what was actually happening previously. So when you talk about the direction of this organisation and the way that we're working today, what you're seeing being played out here is a graphic example of the power of this organisation working in a completely different manner.
Thank you, Jeff. Councillor O'Kawate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't necessarily know, Madam Chair, whether I would agree with our Chief Executive that we didn't have any control. I'm pleased that this action now is being taken But that could have been done right from the start. It could have allayed the anxiety in the community, and it could have allayed, and it could have perhaps lessened the dent to our reputation. Everything that we saw. Can you just? I don't know. Would you mind just putting with all of the partners involved there? And I mean, all of those people are currently. I mean, they could have been active right from the start and put the process together. MSD, the police, they're all here. They're all here. So all I'm just saying is that I'm absolutely pleased to see what's happened, but I do know had good process by MSD, a significant government organisation, had been put in place right from the start, we wouldn't have been in this. We wouldn't have had the raru that we've had in our community had it been done right from the start. So just wanted to make that point, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you for noting, Councillor Rokawate, and I agree with it being MSD, but just want to be clear that the control wasn't with Council, it was with MSD. But I will ask our Chief Executive to respond if he wishes.
Councillor Rokawate, I think you're correct in what your analysis has just been. What the point that I was merely making was that these are the partners effectively that have been needed to bring together in order to make this change. We ourselves as an organisation could not make the difference here without the influence to these organisations. In other words, we couldn't simply go about and say, this is how it's going to be. We had to exert the leadership and influence to achieve this.
And it is a partnership approach. Your Worship, followed by Councillor Kumar and Councillor Yates.
Well, I want to congratulate you, and firstly I want to congratulate you, Jeff, because you've come under incredible pressure from our expectations of our community, but we listened, and in the long-term plan we started the workshops in December, and we said housing and community safety was critical, and we said families in motels is entirely unacceptable as our long-term stays. So today is the announcement, which couldn't be better, following our long-term plan on Monday. And this has been an enormous amount of work. I accept what you're saying, Councillor Rokawate, about MSD. MSD couldn't do it on their own. They work in silos. So all of those agencies work in silos. And what we've demonstrated here is a new way of local council working. That is the future of local government. We put ourselves at the centre of this. We raised it up to the Prime Minister, who seconded it to the Minister of Housing, who said get on with Rotorua with their housing plan and get on with sorting out the motels first. And we all said it had to be on compassionate grounds about our mothers and children and our families first, and we all supported that. I'm really pleased with these announcements because they're comprehensive. It's not just one quick fix from MSD. There's a component of every agency in there, and I'm pleased to see the DHB in there because that's also critical for us working together collaboratively as a community, along with iwi. And I was incredibly impressed when we went in with Rosemary taking us in to look at those 11 service providers who were working in this room, and they'd never ever been together before. So they all had bits of contracts with different agencies, and this mechanism has brought them all together through the task force. And the goodwill of them to find a localised, bespoke Rotorua solution was really incredibly heartwarming. And you're right, Meripeka, that they have capacity locally, but there was no mechanism to call them together till we got that instruction from the top. So we haven't been doing nothing. The tourism industry is going to take this with some mixed reaction. I would be perfectly frank, because they'll like the exclusive use. That has been damaging to our reputation when people rocked up and also found they were in mixed cohorts in motels. I also like the fact that with the management of MHUD, the distribution of the use of motels is going to make the manifestation that is so obvious to us about community safety much more easily managed, and police are right at the centre of this too. So tourism will say yes, And we've got to stop before the public holidays. We've got to say there's plenty of room in our town, plenty of room. We haven't got the international visitors. So we've managed this, but it is a short-term solution. It could take up to 2 years, I'm informed, and we mustn't forget at the same time we've got to open up that pipeline for housing. And that's the issue that we can manage here with our other partners of developers, iwi, and our council staff. So this is a great thing that has happened here. And yes, we were concerned about community safety and public perception. We were, but we didn't sit back and do nothing. And we didn't just say police sorted out, MSD sorted out. We actually showed leadership in here. And I congratulate you. And this is the outward-facing sort of results that we're going to expect more of from council. Because when you look at the future of local government, health is right in the middle of there, looking at locality networks now. How do we get all our health providers in this town with iwi working together like this task force? So we're well versed to how we work together. We've got a community with the goodwill to work together, and I am so thrilled about this announcement. But for me, it's just the start. And it's not a long-term solution, but well done to all of those involved.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, JP. Thank you, Rosemary. I guess this was unprecedented times. We've probably never seen something like this. And to have been inhuman and show no empathy at that stage would have been very challenging. I think the district council probably did what they did and in hindsight thought, hey, we could do it better now. But at that time, I think the council did what they had to do, and the repercussions are there for us now. And we've improved. I think our district plan has been challenged as well. And the steps we are taking now probably might see that our district plan can be restored. It's probably going to take a longer road. But I don't think anybody should take the high road and say, hey, look, that these things should have been fixed from day one. We were under immense pressure. The world was under immense pressure. We had to have empathy. You know, when you get wheat, you're going to get some weevils. It's just the way life is. But you take out the weevils, you don't discard the wheat.
Thank you, Councillor Kumar. Councillor Yates.
And through you, Madam Chair, actually, I really liked that point there, Councillor Kumar, about the weevils and the wheat. Well done. He pai tērā whakaaro. But I just wanted to congratulate the team as well. It has been a long time coming. To think that this time last year we were in a rather perplexed situation, and even the inference of facilitating such a large group of partners was daunting at that time too. But we have come through it, and we're now at a situation where we can start looking at relevant accommodation for our children. We can no longer allow them to be living in environments where they feel less important than their friends that they attend their local schools with. So thank you so much for the hard work, and also to all of our partners that have come on board. It's been a great buzz down the hallway there with the many new faces joining the team here to work consolidated on this particular kaupapa. So just a mihi kia koutou.
Kia ora. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. I want to endorse the comments made with regard to this new approach. I think it's a comprehensive, much more sophisticated treatment. And I don't want this to be taken as a criticism, but I wonder if the model can be extended in the future to conceptualise learning pathways for those, the whānau that are going to be involved, that have the prospect of living in motels for not months but years. And I wondered if education and training and other forms of progression to help people make progress in their lives, including the 501s. I wouldn't want to think that the 501s are going to be sort of pushed off into separate accommodation and then left. I wonder if we can somehow in the future conceptualise ways and means of helping people advance the quality of their lives with employment, education and training and so on. But thank you for all the good work that's going on in this area. And as for the photo, just flip back to that photograph of providers. I just want to draw attention to these people. You've got some absolute stars in that group. Wonderful people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Was there a response from you, Rosemary?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So certainly the idea is that certainly among the HUD motels, Lau has been talking around helping the providers to find those other pathways for people. So definitely trying to get people in the motels involved in training and education and the whole thing about a pathway out. It's not just here's a motel, somewhere to stay. It's here's a motel, somewhere to stay for now, but this is your pathway out. And if that means helping people into employment, helping them with addictions, helping them with childcare issues, getting a driver's licence, whatever it is, those other things around how do you get the pathway out is really important. It's not just a, right, here you are, this is it. There's definitely much more to it.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Kia ora, Rosemary. Thank you very much. I too say congratulations, but I'll also say wait for it. 1st of July onwards, even this wonderful initiative will be criticised. Forgive me, because normally I try and be positive about everything, but I can't understand why whingers and moaners complain so much. Do they want everyone back in Kuedo Park? You know, it's not what we want, but I suppose it makes up the world. Some complained about MIQs, they'll complain about everything. If we can also keep the politics out of it, I think it'd be a lot better. Kia ora, I'll go back to being positive. Kia ora.
Mr. Waru.
No complaints. Kia ora tātou. Hoi anō, gai te tautoko tonu I o kōrero anko. Yeah, just around the scope of great work, rawe, about time. Just wondering, and it sort of follows on from a few of the questions that have been raised already, and given the planning that you're doing with all that other stuff, JP, and you know, with the destination management plan thing and all that, is there an opportunity here to sort of make that group a bit bigger and actually apply the same thing to everything? Not just wait until the ambulance fall off the cliff and then we've got to fix it up after that. Just a question.
That's a great question, Mr. Waru, and I'm going to hand it over to our Chief Executive.
Look, I think one of the things I think it's important to say is that this is not just all our team has been doing. And in fact, when you look at the activity that our teams have been working on, and when I say our teams, it's the work that Rosemary and JP have been working on, but also Jocelyn and Gina. This represents actually only a small part of the activity that they're currently engaged in. And the reason it is only a small part is it is actually only a small part of the solution. And Councillor McPherson, you were quite correct when you said that we need to apply this approach to actually all of our work, and it is exactly what we're doing. You've got an expectation on us, and you signed this off on Monday, to deliver 6,000 homes by 2030, and to also develop over the top of that the ability to provide greater growth for 4,000 more sections. That is a huge aspirational target, and it will only be met if we continue to work in the way that you've actually seen us working in today, and that's exactly what our actual teams are working with. In terms of breadth, it is actually about Māori development, it is about Māori land development, it is about Papakainga development, but equally so at the other end of the continuum, it is also a greater amount of commercial land being developed and commercial housing development being taken. The Mayor has already put, I think, a little lever earlier on today about inner city development, and JP has already alluded to the fact that over the next 2-3 weeks or thereabouts you'll be hearing about some inner city developments that are actually being progressed at the moment. We can't share all of these things with you in the way that we would like to share with you. And the reason we can't always is that this is about partnership. And of course our partners have got clear views about what should be shared and when, and so therefore we're very controlled by them as to how we can actually openly share progress and share information. Some of this will need to be in confidential, unfortunately, and the reason it's in confidential is that some of these developments actually more often than not aren't ours and they are commercial in nature. And the commercial partners in those developments fundamentally are very clear with us that they wish to control the nature of when announcements are made, and we can't but not honour those requirements. But look, what I would say is that what you're seeing today is the first of a number of projects that we've got live and active at the moment.
Thank you very much. I will open it up for discussion as well if anyone wanted to make a point given the significance of this, and I know elected members and our public have waited some time, but as our Chief Executive has just explained, there's been a lot of work that had to happen behind the scenes before we were able to bring that plan of partnership approach to the table. Councillor Okawate.
Thank you. I'm just interested in the siting of the hub, so that's not yet been identified. Thank you.
Were there any further comments? There appear to be none. Well, look, thank you very much, and I just want to reiterate some of those key outcomes that I heard you speak about, because they are really at the essence of the concerns of our community, but also the expectations that we've had as elected members. And those, of course, are first and foremost that our families in emergency housing are safe, and our visitors are confident to visit Rotorua, but also about community safety for the wider community around those as well. So look, thank you very much for the work that you do, and we appreciate that it has been quite a big task that we've put on you, because as Council set the direction, we then gave the expectation to our Chief Executive and our DCEs to deliver and to perform, and I'm very proud of what you guys have managed to bring back for us, and I look forward to the progress, of course, and assessing that performance in future at this committee. So thank you very much. Just before we wrap up this operational reports, I just want to go back to one point about the staff turnover. Thomas has managed to in this time confirm that number for us, so I'll just invite him to the table to confirm that for us so that we make sure we have the correct information on record. Thank you, Thomas.
Cool. Just a little bit of background on the number. So historically, Council has sat within the 15 to 18% range with regards to staff turnover. Within that number, though, there were parts of our organisation that had quite high turnover. They were generally customer service facing parts of our business that employed generally under fixed term agreements and were seen as roles that where you could start your career, such as our customer service centre, the library, even the aquatic centre. So when you normalise that, the actual turnover of staff was closer to below 15%. Today, we are sitting within exactly that same range. However, we are under pressure in a couple of areas, and in particular, as you can appreciate, attracting and retaining planners and building people. And the other challenge we're facing at the moment is business analysts with regards to our IT functions are in incredibly high demand. And at the moment, we have got a project where there are fixed term staff, and there is a little bit of attrition in that space as a result of the competitive nature. But overall, we are sitting in those historical ranges.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Would you like to take any questions on that? Sorry, I just see there are a number of questions. If you don't mind, we will. So I'll go to your worship and then Councillor Okawate.
For the record, I heard at the beginning of this meeting that there's been 4 restructurings. There's only been one in 2014 and the one that is almost complete. Are you including CCOs in the restructuring?
I'll just ask that of the Chief Executive.
No, absolutely. We undertook an extensive review of this organisation in 2014, and there has been no such work undertaken since that actual time. There have, having said that, always been, there are within teams and within parts of the organisation, there is always change work being done, but there has been no whole of organisation change work being undertaken since 2014. To change the topic a little bit, I just want to draw things together just in this public part of the meeting. We started off with an overview as to our financial performance. You'll recall that the financial performance expectations that you set for us were always going to be difficult to meet. Yet what you are seeing is the organisation responding financially effectively within our annual plan budget, and actually exceeding that. You've also seen at the end of this session an example of a piece of work that's been undertaken that could never be planned for. So what the organisation has been doing is exceeding expectations, in my view, in terms of performance, and actually doing work that was much more broadly, much broader than what was originally contemplated, yet we are doing so within our financial parameters. So from my perspective, well, I think what you're seeing is a group of people that are working incredibly hard at the moment, delivering on performance expectations, as you've seen in the later part of this session, and also delivering on the financial parameters that you're also expecting.
Thank you. And I think we had a final question from Councillor Rotorua.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate that we are a continuous improvement, performance improvement organisation. And I did hear this morning someone say that perhaps with some of the chattering that's been going on out in the community, it could hinder the recruitment of good staff to our organisation. Well, I have to say that we will have no trouble getting good staff, and it's mainly because of our CEO. I mean, if you know anybody who's looking in the local government for a job, it's the CEO that people will want to know who it is. And Jeff Williams, and indeed his deputy CEOs, who have that reputation. People do want to work here. They do know that it's being led by a person who is seeking constantly to improve the performance of the organisation, and that's why they'll come. So, you know, we do have that name out there. The chattering that goes on is done by people who actually have probably never worked at the level that we are working right now. I'm fortunate too that I have other work that I'm involved with, and we always look to the reputation and the manner and standing of our CEO. So I just want to say that if the chattering goes on, we don't contribute to that. We should not be contributing to that. There will be others around this table that do. And they're becoming quite well known, but we don't, because we know that we have the best. That was a decision made that was by us, and we support that. So people who are looking for positions in local government would certainly not look past working with Jeff Williams and his team. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rotorua. I think we'll wrap up there. We're going to now move into public excluded, and as we only have a few items on there, I think we'll just push through until the lunch break. So I will advise that there is one item for consideration in public excluded, and that's the lakefront redevelopment update and, of course, the minutes. And the reason for going into confidential is because of commercial sensitivity, but also to enable commercial or industrial negotiations. So I ask for a mover and a seconder that Council move into public excluded session. Moved to Mr Waru, seconded Councillor Wang. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you, carried. And we'll just have a 2-minute break while we clear the gallery.